Li Daozi stared at Yi Futian. The two of them had both comprehended 79 swords, and thus were well matched in terms of how well they were able to use the sword will of the sword peaks. Victory or defeat would be determined by their own power then. Li Daozi stared at Yi Futian. The two of them had both comprehended 79 swords, and thus were well matched in terms of how well they were able to use the sword will of the sword peaks. Victory or defeat would be determined by their own power then. Li Daozi's body shone brilliantly. He formed a seal with both hands, and dazzling light bloomed from his body. Endless sword chi flowed over him and swept up into the sky where it formed a divine sword. When this sword was formed, there was endless chanting between heaven and earth, and it seemed as if all things were bowing down to it. This was Li Daozi's sword spirit. In the instant that it appeared, strange illusions appeared in the sky, and endless sword light shone. Golden runes descended from on high, filling the vast area. Each one seemed to contain sword will. The sword spirit split apart. The one sword split into two, then into three, then into countless swords. Soon, the sky was filled with swords, each one with a rune filled with sword will etched upon it. Yi Futian looked all around him as they fell. The endless runes were flowing towards him, summoning sword will from the mountain peaks. Li Daozi's swords covered sword comprehension mountain. Sword will surged within Yi Futian. His sword spirit appeared, and although it was not as brilliant as Li Daozi's, it had a more powerful aura, which made a terrible burst of sword light sweep out around him. There was a sharp sound. The swords imprinted with runes fell swiftly towards Yi Futian, leaving golden sword marks in the air itself. Yi Futian looked up, and with a single thought, a sword pierced through the storm of sword chi, leaving a slash mark through the air as it cut through the sky. At the moment that the two swords met, they cut through each other. They both shattered into pieces and then disappeared. However, the sky split open, and there was a horrific noise as more golden divine swords fell from the air towards Yi Futian. Heaven-splitting swords appeared all around Yi Futian, destroying the oncoming golden swords. But up in the sky, the golden swords had formed a river of swords that was rushing wildly towards Yi Futian to swallow him up. Yi Futian looked up into the sky. All of the swords would reach him in a moment. Powerful sword will surged from him, and he let loose with the cleave of all things. In a flash, countless words slashed into the air with the cleave of all things. They were not only fast, but they were also cutting in different directions, completely destroying the river of swords. Countless people were watching from a distance. The area where the two of them were fighting had been swallowed up by swords. This sword will, the cultivators who were watching were speechless. Any one of those swords could have killed a Nirvana-level cultivator. With so many swords falling, they could have destroyed an army of saints. The 79th sword peak resonated with the two of them, and sword will surged up into the sky. Li Daozi looked at Yi Futian and stepped forward. He was floating up in the air, and endless sword will gathered together around him, integrating itself into his sword spirit. At the same time, numerous divine swords appeared around his sword spirit. They all shot forward at once, as if propelled by a single thought. The swords fell, making it seem like they were in a world of swords, and the apocalypse was coming. Heaven-slaying sword light shone from a massive falling sky sword up in the air, and shot towards Yi Futian. Endless sword will thundered above Yi Futian's head as the cleave of all things swept all around him. He raised his sword spirit with both hands and sliced it into the sky. The sword will flowed backward, destroying everything within it. Slice, slice. The terrible sound of swords slashing rang out, and the air itself seemed to be cut by terrible sword marks. A divine sword descended from the sky through the backward-flowing sword will, resisting all methods used to stop it. Even the fleeting divine storm could not disrupt it. It cut through the storm of fleeting divine swords as it fell towards Yi Futian. The divine sword Li family's sword of doomsday versus Lord Taishuan's fleeting divine sword. Which one is stronger? Everyone was shaken as they watched the magnificent scene unfolding before their eyes. They wanted to see which of the two combatants was stronger. The sword of doomsday was the ultimate technique of the divine sword Li family, but the one that Li Daozi was using now surpassed even that. He had integrated what he had learned in the divine palace into it. Each sword seal in the river of swords contained incomparably terrible killing power within it. Yi Futian's eyes grew cold when he saw the sword of doomsday piercing through the storm. He pointed into the sky, and the fleeting divine swords suddenly dissipated, then reformed and shot towards Li Daozi. The fleeting divine swords could not destroy the sword of doomsday, but neither could the sword of doomsday destroy the fleeting divine swords. The two of them used different sword techniques. Their attacks had destroyed each other, but they could not pierce each other's defenses. Li Daozi looked at the oncoming swords, but his expression was unchanged. His body transformed into that of a sword god, and endless sword will burst forth from him. Swordsmanship flowed through his veins, and sword marks were etched into his bones. His whole self seemed like a sword. His thousands of swords gathered together into one, and incomparably brilliant sword light shone from him. If he could not block the fleeting divine swords, then he would not try to. Crack! Divine sword light pierced through him, but he still looked unperturbed. Countless sword runes appeared all over his body, giving forth powerful sword will that collided with the oncoming swords. Even amidst the destructive storm, he still gazed down at Yi Futian. He had already forged a sword body, which he had transformed into. The fleeting divine swords would never be able to destroy him. He wanted to see if Yi Futian could withstand the sword of doomsday. A sword body of the great path. Everyone trembled as they stared at Li Daozi. This was crazy. As the two swordsmen fought, it was not a battle between two swords, but rather a battle between a man and a sword. As he watched the sword of doomsday coming towards him, Yi Futian's figure flashed, and he disappeared from where he had been. The sword of doomsday seemed to have locked onto him, and it pursued him, but Yi Futian pierced through the heavens and the earth like he was a word himself, and flew up to the highest part of the sky. Li Daozi withstood his sword. Could it be that Shenjing does not dare to directly face Li Daozi's sword? Someone asked. However, Yi Futian had not yet forged a sword body of the Great Path, so there was nothing unusual about this. But this Shenjing was so fast. He was skilled at the Great Path of space. The sword of doomsday flew back to Li Daozi and entered his body, reconnecting with his sword spirit. His sword will grew even more ferocious. He had felt his opponent's fleeting divine sword threaten his life spirit, and so he had summoned his sword spirit back to defend himself. Yi Futian had reached the highest part of the sky, and he was level with the mountain peaks. He looked at Li Daozi. He had cultivated his defenses to be incredibly formidable, so even the fleeting divine sword could not destroy them. He had a boy of the great path, and his flesh was made of pure will. He was truly at the limits of the Saint Plane. Li Daozi's flesh resonated with the great path. He looked up at Yi Futian. Was he trying to avoid his sword? He closed his eyes and sensed the great path of swordsmanship with his divine spirit. An incomparably brilliant light shone from all the sword peaks, and many divine swords shot forth from them, floating through the air as they covered the sky. In a flash, the entire area was completely covered in flying divine swords. Burying swordsmanship, the disciples of Divine Palace felt their hearts tremble. Moreover, this was not the end. Li Daozi continued to form sword seals, which flew through the air endlessly. Suddenly, countless swords appeared within all the sword will, all of them pointing at Yi Futian. The sword light that streamed from them was powerful enough to split the air itself. Rending swordsmanship. Everyone trembled once again. Li Daozi stepped forward, and everyone could see that he was flying among not only swords but also human figures. These human figures merged with the swords as they flew through the air. Transforming swordsmanship. The disciples of the Divine Palace were shaken to their core. This was a sword technique that only someone who had formed a soul of the way could perform. Li Daozi was still a step away from doing so, but he had still managed to use transforming swordsmanship, meaning that he was breaking through his limits. He had sought out Shenjing so that he could test himself and break into the next level. In the end, there were thousands of swords pointing at Yi Futian, and he was buried within them. How is this sword? Li Daozi said to Yi Futian. Previously, Yi Futian had evaded his sword, but how could he do that with this one? You have a lot of swords here, but this is all just a bit too flashy. Since you have cultivated the way of swordsmanship, You must know that a single sword can cut through 1,000, answered Yi Futian. Li Daozi looked at him and said, Show me. One sword could cut through 1,000? How could that be? He had so many swords, and none of them was anything less than a masterpiece of craftsmanship. Even those watching the battle thought that Yi Futian was being arrogant. He actually thought that Li Daozi was being too flashy. Every one of the swords that he had formed was incredibly powerful. How could Shenjing cut through them all with a single sword? His fleeting divine sword was not strong enough. It would not be able to defeat Li Daozi's sword technique. Yi Futian looked down, with sword will flowing all around him. All of the sword peaks lit up with sword light. Come here, swords, called Yi Futian. Suddenly, countless swords flew from the peaks towards him, circling in the air above him. The people watching could see many of the peaks lighting up, including the 80th. Everyone looked shocked. He had comprehended the 80th sword. There was only one left. In the instant that the 80th sword peak lit up, the countless swords roared and shook as they resonated with Yi Futian's body. A terrible storm of sword will whipped through the sky. Return to each other. The countless swords that were resonating at the same frequency merged together, and suddenly a burst of sword will exploded, causing all the swords in the sky to clank and clatter. Attack! Shouted Li Daozi. His swords buried the sky, but at that moment, a terrible storm of sword will was building up on Yi Futian's sword. Bang! 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 All of the swords were shattered into dust. Every sword in the sky was destroyed. Everyone watched this scene in shock. How strong was this sword of Yi Futian's? Yi Futian formed a seal with both hands, and the countless sword images that stretched as far as the eye could see lit up and resonated with each other. At that moment, it seemed like there was only a single sword. Go, said Yi Futian, and the sword shot out. Everything in this sword's path was destroyed. The sword of doomsday in front of Li Daozi shot out to meet it, but it was still shattered by the oncoming sword. The sword reached its destination, appearing right in front of Li Daozi's forehead. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. One sword to break all methods. One sword to break all methods. Everyone's eyes were fixated there, staring at the scene in front of them. Yi Futian did not exaggerate. He did it with his sword. All swords resonated into a sword, and no matter what was thrown at it, be it burying, splitting, turning, or even the divine sword of doomsday, they were all smashed and destroyed with only his sword. Feeling the sword might spreading out from the sword in front of Li Daozi's brow chakra, many gradually came to their senses again. As the first person of the Divine Sword Li family, and the direct disciple of the Palace Lord of the Divine Sword Palace, and the premier swordsman under Renhuang, Li Daozi, was defeated by Shenjing, the swordsman from Taishan Mountain. Li Daozi, who was one of the strongest figures in his generation at the Divine Palace, had lost some of his luster in the eyes of the others. However, everyone was more shocked by Yi Futian's strength. This disciple, secretly taught by Lord Taishan, who had given him instruction on swordsmanship and music, aside from his absolute domineering comprehension of swordsmanship. There were 81 sword peaks on the Sword Comprehension Mountain. He only heard that the last sword peak remained unsolved. Now he relied on the comprehension of the 80th sword peak to defeat Li Daozi by the sword. The battle of the trial and the battle today was enough to spread the name of Shenjing from Taishan Mountain all over the world. After today, there would definitely be a place for him in the future of the upper heavens realm. Of course, the premise was that he would not fall before he got there. Li Daozi gazed at the sword in front of his brow chakra. He felt extremely complicated at the moment. He had lost to a swordsman from Taishan Mountain. This battle was initiated by him, and it wasn't simply because he wanted revenge for Li Sun, as that would be meaningless. What he wanted was to use Yi Futian's sword to refine his own sword, so he kept waiting until Yi Futian had resolved the sword before him. Otherwise, he thought that the other really did not even have the qualifications to challenge him. His patience was rewarded. Yi Futian had finally arrived, and he did not disappoint. He exhibited super abilities in swordsmanship, and in the end, the 80th sword of the solution finally pointed to him. "So, this is the 80th sword," Li Daozi mumbled. Just as his voice fell, the infinite sword will between heaven and earth resonated, and an extremely brilliant divine light erupted from his body, just like a sword. The resonating swordsmanship finally united, and an extremely bright glow of the swordsmanship bloomed from his body, directly breaking the sword in front of his brow chakra. Futian didn't interfere but merely looked at Li Daozi quietly. The 80th sword peak and Li Daozi had created a certain resonance, and there was sword will flowing to his body. Li Daozi leaned slightly forward toward Futian, saluted him with the sword, and then turned to walk toward the last sword mountain. This bow appeared to be showing Futian his gratitude for testing his sword. Even though he was defeated, his strength was, in fact, progressing. Although Li Daozi was the first person of the descendant of the divine sword Li family, the family had high hopes for him, and Li Daozi had always carried these many hopes and dreams on his back. However, he never thought that he would be unparalleled. There would always be someone else out there stronger than him. For example, in the Divine Palace, there was a person that even he would need to respect. Someone by consensus of the Divine Palace regarded as the first person of the descendants. Now there appeared a genius talent who had defeated him. This was not an entirely unacceptable reality. What he wanted to do was to continually surpass himself, not just be invincible in the world. In the 3,000 realms of the Great Path, there were countless outstanding figures. Who could truly be invincible? That man was hailed as the first of the descendants at the Divine Palace and was even reputed as the strongest this generation had seen in the upper heavens realm. No one could compete with him. Maybe there was no one who could match his likes in the entire 3,000 realms of the Great Path. In the way of cultivation, only by constantly surpassing oneself could one surpass all others naturally, even those who he once looked up to. His sword did not seek to be unparalleled but only to move forward. As long as he did not retreat, he would not dishonor the swordsmanship. Futian watched as Li Daozi was walking away. Li Daozi had come to the last sword peak to comprehend. It was as if he wanted to unlock the last sword to cast the divine wheel of the Great Path and complete this last step to break through into Renhuang. Everyone at Comprehension Sword Mountain understood Li Daozi's intention. No one would look down on him because he was defeated. How many in this generation at Divine Palace dared to boast that they could best Li Daozi? If someone could, then there was probably only one person who could do it. What right did they have to look down on Li Daozi because of his defeat? Li Daozi's defeat was not because he was weak, but only because he had met a stronger opponent. Futian had unlocked one more sword than him, and perhaps it was because of this sword that Li Daozi was slightly at a disadvantage. Suppose Li Daozi had unlocked the battle of the 80th sword a little earlier. There would no telling about the outcome. Of course, there were no ifs. Defeat was defeat. It's just that, even in defeat, Li Daozi was still the peerless swordsman, the extraordinary figure of the Divine Palace. Likewise, Futian walked toward that last sword mountain. Everyone thought that he had already broken the record of Sword Comprehension Mountain, and only the last sword was left. Could it be that he would not overlook this sword? However, he was not yet at the realm, so it should be difficult to resolve it. Futian studied it for a moment and then gave up. He knew that he could not unlock the sword for the time being. Turning around, Futian moved away, wanting to leave. Everyone was slightly relieved. He had given it up after all. If Futian were able to unlock this sword, it would be an unimaginable horror, as he had just broken into nirvana not that long ago. How about it? Tianyu smiled and asked Yi Man, who was beside him. Yi Man looked at Futian and said, "The speed of his unlocking the sword is unparalleled, and his perception is extremely outstanding. He's a rare talent. If he is willing to stay at the Divine Palace to cultivate, there must be many powerful characters who would be willing to accept him as a direct disciple. That goes without saying." His battle with Li Daozi was probably seen by many at the Sword Palace, Tianyu whispered. He was obviously correct on that account. Indeed, the Sword Palace had watched this battle closely. "Let's go." Lifting his feet, Tianyu walked toward Futian. Futian naturally noticed Tianyu coming this way and stopped. Tianyu laughed, saying, "Brother Shinjing's sword, would be hard-pressed to find its equal at the divine palace. Not even you? Yi Futian suddenly asked. Yi Tianyu was surprised when he heard the question. Clearly, he didn't expect Yi Futian to speak like this. There was no match in the divine palace, and Yi Tianyu himself was also a disciple of the divine palace. Next to him, Yi Man frowned when she heard Yi Futian's blunt words. This was clearly a sign of contempt for anyone other than himself. To her, this was a great disrespect to Yi Tianyu. Just thinking out loud, please don't take it to heart, Yi Futian said with a smile. It's okay. Yi Tianyu didn't mind. He appeared quite diplomatic in the divine palace. Of course, not including him, said Yi Man, who was next to him. Yi Tianyu may not have cared, but she cared. She looked at Yi Futian with cold indifference. Even though Shen Jing was talented enough, he lacked respect for others in his speech. Yi Futian glanced at Yi Man and smiled. If there is ever a chance, I would like to experience it for myself. As he finished speaking, Yi Futian walked past Yi Tianyu. Since their first battle, hopefully Yi Tianyu had not just been sitting around and had made no progress. They tested the land of trials, and the top disciples from the divine palace each had their own share of fruits of the way, and Yi Tianyu also had this qualification. If he was progressing, then Yi Tianyu must have been progressing as well. It was just that his level of strength at this point was an unknown. However, it was bound to be stronger than the previous battle. Yi Man had great confidence in Yi Tianyu. Yi Tianyu was a little surprised. His intention was to be friendly with Yi Futian, but Yi Futian seemed to be of the mind of rejecting such goodwill. How did he and Zhuang Hong come together before? As Yi Tianyu watched Yi Futian's departing figure, Yi Man's face displayed some displeasure. She said, "This victory over Li Daozi presumably made him think that he is invincible when it comes to divine palace. He is a little too conceited. It's normal for such characters to be proud like this." Yi Tianyu didn't take it to heart but felt that this cultivator from Taishin Mountain was very sure of himself. Yi Man was speechless when she heard Yi Tianyu's response. Presently, Yi Tianyu's personality seemed to have changed, and there was no telling if it was related to what had happened in the heavenly mandate realm. Actually, trying is also fine. It could be exciting, Zhuang Hong, who was next to him, said with a smile. Yi Tianyu glanced at him and asked, "Why didn't you guys try it before?" "He didn't ask me to try." Zhuang Hong smiled. "Now, do you think Shen Jing can be beaten?" Yi Tianyu asked. "I'm not sure, and now there's only one person at the divine palace who could say that with certainty," Zhuang Hong said. He was not so delusional, he wasn't even sure if he could beat Li Daozi. Except for him, no one could boast of confidence in defeating Shen Jing, who had bested Li Daozi. For a definitive victory, indeed, it was only him. Yi Tianyu nodded in agreement, demonstrating just how much they respect this he that they were all talking about. Publicly recognized at Shangxiao Divine Palace as the premier talent who represented this generation, and regarded by the elders of the Divine Palace as the future leader of Divine Palace, he was the hope of the Divine Palace. It was thought that he might become its strongest character. Yi Futian didn't know what Yi Tianyu was thinking. Yi Tianyu did not recognize him and therefore wanted to be on his good side, but he and Yi Tianyu were destined to stand on opposite sides, and naturally, he would not be too friendly with him. At this time, Yi Futian flickered. Suddenly, he seemed to detect something and stopped involuntarily, asking, "Who's there?" Just as his voice fell, two shadows descended like swords. They came in front of Yi Futian. One of them showed a surprised look and asked, "Did you feel it?" "Well," Yi Futian nodded and looked at the other, "What can I do for you?" "You have excellent swordsmanship, and someone in the Sword Palace wants to see you. Would you be willing to go?" The person asked Yi Futian. A surprised look flashed across Yi Futian's eyes. At Sword Palace, someone wanted to see him. Li Daozi was the first person of the descendants at the Sword Palace. This battle must have attracted the attention of Sword Palace. Now, they wanted to see him. Their intention was self-evident. He also guessed that the person who wanted to see him was not a simple character. Otherwise, it was not sincere enough. Li Daozi was a disciple under the palace lord. If he defeated Li Daozi, who should he be under? "I do not wish to go," Yi Futian replied. The Renhuang opposite him was stunned for a moment when he heard his reply. He looked at Yi Futian, somewhat bewildered. This was the first time they encountered someone who refused so quickly, without hesitation. Shenjing must have already guessed this person's identity. Even so, he still refused without hesitation. He must be, without a doubt, a disciple of Lord Taishan. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Seeing that the other was still looking at him, Yi Futian couldn't help but ask, "Is there anything else the elder wishes to say?" Seeing that the other was still looking at him, Yi Futian couldn't help but ask, "Is there anything else the elder wishes to say?" Several Renhuang from the Sword Palace looked at Yi Futian shocked. Then one of them said, "Sorry to disturb you. Then allow me to bid you farewell." Yi Futian smiled and bowed with his hands together, then flickered away. Several Renhuang from the Sword Palace looked awkward. One murmured, "He's pretty confident. We are getting old, and we don't understand young people's world anymore," those on the side also remarked with a sigh. Even if he was really the secret disciple of Lord Taishan, the palace lord of the Sword Palace was not some nobody. If he wanted to meet Yi Futian was more or less obliged to accept. Even if it were just some random advisement, it would only do him good. But he made everything so simple. "Let's see where he's going," they continued. If Yi Futian was unwilling to meet with the palace lord of Sword Palace, where was he going? "Watch him," another also said. They weren't deliberately following Yi Futian to hurt him, but that they were feeling mad about the whole affair. At the same time, they were curious to see how he planned to cultivate in the Divine Palace. Yi Futian was well on his way. He didn't really have any thoughts about not wanting to meet the palace lord of the Sword Palace. He just didn't think it was necessary. After all, he would never cultivate under the palace lord of the Sword Palace, so there was no need to waste time. With so many treasured holy lands in the Divine Palace, like Celestial Worthy Mountain and Sword Comprehension Mountain, wouldn't it be nice to just cultivate there? He had brushed aside the people from Taishan Mountain and Little Phoenix, just so that he could cultivate in peace for some time. Since there were such great conditions for cultivation, he couldn't let it just go to waste. Next, Yi Futian went around different places to cultivate. There were palaces for enlightenment, mountain caves to seek the way, and even in the process of this, he had some confrontations with the disciples of the Divine Palace. It was not intentional on his part, but now that Shenjing's name was well known, there were some genius-level characters at the Divine Palace who wanted to practice with him. They would deliberately find excuses to fight him. The result was always the same, and he brutally beat many disciples of the Divine Palace without mercy. There was even a woman with outstanding talent who was also beaten badly by him. He didn't show any pity or exception, which shocked everyone that he could have been so brutal. In a brief time, Shenjing made a fierce reputation for himself at the Divine Palace. Many looked was him and wanted to beat him, but most of them would not succeed. Everyone really felt that there was only one person at the Divine Palace who could definitely beat Yi Futian. But why would he make a move? Now, his only goal was to cast the dive wheel of the Great Path, not just the divine wheel of the Great Path in the simplest sense, or he would have done it already. He had been suppressing his own realm, wanting to cast the divine wheel of extraordinary magnitude. Now, more and more people in the Divine Palace were paying attention to Yi Futian's movement. At this time, Yi Futian came to a place with beautiful scenery. Stepping across the stairs, there was a lake in front of him. It was very vast, like a miniature of the Sea of the Path. At the end of the lake was a most sacred palace, and this scenery seemed familiar. When Yi Futian went to the Sea of the Path for trial, he had seen something like this scenery before him. Except over there, the landscape was a little ethereal and surreal, and over here, the scene in front of him was more real. It was as if an actual Fey palace right in front of him. "What place is this?" Yi Futian whispered. He moved forward and walked to the edge of the sea. There was a very strong will of the way that permeated from the front, which compelled him to move over there to take a better look. He faintly felt that there seemed to be something calling him, but of course, this slippery feeling was hard to discern. Was it real or not? It was difficult for him to say. No matter where this was, Yi Futian understood that it must have been an extraordinary place. In the direction of the two banks, a group of sacred palaces congregated, exuding a solemn feeling. Traces of sword will whistled and turned into a sword, and the sword entered into the path river. Yi Futian stepped forward and walked on the sword that he had summoned. He drove toward the path river. No matter where this was, the receiving receptionist had already told him when he entered the divine palace that he was once in, he could go anywhere in the divine palace as long as he was physically able to do so. However, he would be doing so at his own risk. Because of this, he had been wandering around inside the divine palace as long as it was suitable for cultivation. There was no restraint in his heart because his goals were very simple. Cultivate, and cultivate some more. To cast the divine wheel of the great path as soon as possible, and set foot into the realm of Renhuang. Everything else could wait until the entry into the realm of Renhuang. The Saint Plane may be regarded as powerful among common folks, but among those top forces, it was far from enough. But his talent was destined to be the center among all the top forces, not existing in some mediocre crowds. Therefore, the only way was to become stronger. From the moment when Yi Futian stepped into Path River, there was an uproar at the Divine Palace. The news spread quickly, and at this time, somewhere inside the Divine Palace, a group of disciples from the Divine Palace were talking amongst themselves. Xin Jing stepped into the Path River? Someone asked. The person next to him nodded. It is said that the sword has entered the Path River. No one blocked him? Asked the man who just spoke. No one. Are the ancestral lands of the Divine Palace to be polluted by outsiders? That disciple's expression slightly changed. And they didn't stop him? Perhaps the elder at the Divine Palace had their own thoughts on this. But even if he had entered the Path River, it is still impossible for Xinjing to enter the ancestral temple. The person next to him did not seem to mind, saying, even though his talent was unmatched, but over the years, who have you ever heard of entering the temple? It's him, the person next to him whispered. That legendary figure from the Divine Palace was the first in the world, an undisputed first at that. Yes, and now he is there. If Xinjing goes, he might meet him there, the person next to him said. Xinjing really knows how to choose a place. He had to choose the ancestral temple. Unless he asked around and knew of the place? At this time, not just the disciples of the Divine Palace, but even many of the prominent figures were also closely watching Yi Futian's every move. At the Sword Palace, the Sword Emperor, who had invited Yi Futian on that day, was there. Looking into the distance, he could vaguely see a sacred palace. He actually went there. The Sword Emperor looked disturbed. Yi Futian had gone to many places these days, but now he had found his way there. Extraordinary people will go to extraordinary places. It is expected that he would eventually find his way here. It's just that he's been wreaking havoc in the Divine Palace, and many disciples have suffered at his hands. He needs to be put in his place, the person next to him said with a smile, kind of expecting Yi Futian to be humbled. He was really getting out of line and needed to be taught a lesson. Otherwise, he would really think that there was no one to defend the Divine Palace. Moreover, he went to various places to cultivate and often reaped great rewards. It would be refreshing to see him being humbled for once, not always getting whatever he wanted so easily. At the Sword Comprehension Mountain, Li Daozi was still unlocking the last sword. At this time, that last sword mountain was shining brightly, and there seemed to be swords flowing. Likewise, there was also a terrible breath of swordsmanship that flowed upon the body of Li Daozi, which was felt by many. They knew faintly that after that battle, Li Daozi was getting closer and closer to the breakthrough. Li Daozi unlocked the sword here, but Xinjing went to the Path River instead. Wan Shuyi, Luo Yue, and Yaya were still here unlocking the swords. At this time, Wan Shuyi came to Yaya's side and said, he has gone to Path River. So I heard, Yaya replied. The premier person of the current generation at the Divine Palace is there. I heard that this person could have become an emperor already, but would not enter the gate of the great path even when he could, all for creating a most extraordinary divine wheel of the great path. It was said that this person not only ranks number 1 of the current generation at the Divine Palace but was also known as the first person under Renhuang in all of Upper Heaven's realm, said Wan Shi. Yaya looked indifferent, and Wan Shui had no idea what she was thinking, so he continued. At the end of Path River is the Divine Temple, an ancestral land of the Divine Palace, mysterious and unknown. If he goes there, will he— What do you want to say? Yaya looked at Wan Shui. Should we persuade him to come back? Wan Shui said to Yaya. Yi Futian's talent could be described as unparalleled. Naturally, he trusted him implicitly. Before, he had heard a lot of things about Yi Futian, and none of them caused any concerns except this time. He was a bit worried. The first among the current generation of Upper Heaven's realm at the ancestral lands of the Divine Palace. No matter the former or the latter, it was enough to give people pause. After all, Yi Futian was not a disciple of the Divine Palace, so it was difficult to predict what kind of danger he would encounter should he embark there. Yaya seemed to be deep in contemplation. The ancestral land of the Divine Palace? A look of worry flashed across her eyes, and upon seeing Yaya's expression, Wan Shui knew that she felt the same as him, fearing any accidents that could happen to Xinjing. If any accidents occur in the ancestral lands of the Divine Palace, will the Divine Palace blame him? Yaya asked Wan Shui. Huh? Wan Shui looked at Yaya without blinking. What would happen if there was some accident at the ancestral lands of the Divine Palace? Not what would happen if something happened to Yi Futian. Looking into Yaya's eyes, he thought, is this girl for real? What accident could happen at the ancestral lands? Wan Shui took a breath and asked. Like, if it was demolished or something else? Yaya asked in a low voice, would the Divine Palace blame us? Wan Shui was speechless. He looked at Yaya with a strange look. He was worried about Xinjing, but this woman worried about the ancestral land of the Divine Palace? What was the thinking behind that? It seemed that Xinjing's friend was not normal. When he came to his senses, Wan Shui whispered, I shouldn't think so. Oh, Yaya nodded. I'm going to continue to cultivate, then. Wan Shui glanced at Yaya and said, sorry to disturb you. Then he turned away. Sorry for the disturbance. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Yi Futian's entry into the Path River caused a great sensation in the Divine Palace. The disciples of the Divine Palace were all focused on this event. This person who had defeated Li Daozi, the first person of the current generation of the Sword Palace, had now gone to the most sacred place in the Divine Palace. Yi Futian's entry into the Path River caused a great sensation in the Divine Palace. The disciples of the Divine Palace were all focused on this event. This person who had defeated Li Daozi, the first person of the current generation of the Sword Palace, had now gone to the most sacred place in the Divine Palace. For so many years, only one person had stepped into it, and now he was in it. Xinjing, a swordsman from Taishan Mountain, would he be able to enter? Yi Futian had no idea that his trip had caused such great unrest. He didn't even know the exact place he wanted to go. He just had a feeling that this place was extraordinary, a place where hidden paths might certainly be suitable for cultivation, so he wanted to take a look. He even had doubts in his heart. Why is this place so quiet? He wondered. In the Path River, there was no one else but him, and there were no disciples of the Divine Palace. This left Yi Futian somewhat baffled. Were the disciples of the Divine Palace that lazy? Was it because they didn't cherish the spiritual resources in the Divine Palace? He had no idea about the kind of place that he had come to. It was not because the disciples of the Divine Palace did not want to come. It was a question if they could get in. The sword entered the Path River and drove toward the palace. In Yi Futian's present state, he thought that he would soon reach his destination. Although this river was very long, it could not be easily crossed. However, he found that even as the sword moved forward, it was still in Path River, and it seemed to stop when it reached the center of the river. Or rather, the distance to the palace ahead always remained the same. He looked down at the sword under his feet. The sword was still moving forward, even causing some ripples as it shuttled in the water. However, no matter how far he moved, it seemed that he was still in the same place. What's going on? Yi Futian looked confused. He couldn't get close? It seemed within reach, clearly in front of him, but at the same time, it seemed to be far beyond the horizon. But he was in the pinnacle of St. Plain, so there was no way he did not understand his own feelings. This time, the mysterious palace was real and solid, unlike the nebulous quality of the land of proving the way. If so, how could it be? He couldn't understand it. Unless there was way to prevent him? This was the only explanation. However, what kind of will of the way could possibly produce such a condition? Yi Futian appeared deep in thought, and he stopped. The sword did not move forward. Everything seemed to be standing still. Space will of the way. Yi Futian whispered. Only the space will of the way could produce such a spectacle. He and his sword were in a space of the great path, bound by the great path, unable to fathom its truth. But this time, he didn't even feel the existence of the space will of the way in reality. If there was really a space of the great path, then it must also exist in the void. The sharp sound of sword roar emerged, and swords appeared around Yi Futian's body. Some of them directly broke through the sky and shot toward the front, wanting to cross the path river and reach the palace. However, he realized that although the swords were extremely fast, they could never reach the destination. He integrated his spiritual will into them, but he still couldn't sense the cause. Many swords now appeared at his feet. Yi Futian sat directly on the sword and closed his eyes, quietly experiencing everything around him as if to imprint all that he saw in the path river into his mind. If everything was so clear, then what was the power that prevented him from moving forward? Yi Futian himself also cultivated the way of space, but at this moment he fell into the way of space again. It only showed that his way of space was still not quite where it needed to be and was far from perfection. Otherwise, he would not have been trapped by the way of space. So close yet so far. Yi Futian's eyes were tightly closed, and everything seemed to have stopped. Time and space stopped flowing in Yi Futian's mind as if he was the only one between heaven and earth at this moment. He sat there quietly. At this moment, he was like a lonely boat in the vast ocean. Loneliness surrounding him, he wanted to find the answer. As time passed, Yi Futian sat there as if he had never moved. This caused a lot of discussion inside the divine palace. Sure enough, and as expected, even though Yi Futian had defeated Li Daozi, he was still trapped in the Path River and could move no further. This was Path River. It led to the ancestral land of the divine palace, and there were no other shortcuts. Only by crossing the Path River could one gain entry into the ancestral land. For many years, how many excellent characters wanted to enter but couldn't? Yi Futian's talent was widely recognized by people of the divine palace. Even if many of them were unhappy with him, they still had to acknowledge Yi Futian's powerful perception. However, this was the Path River after all. Sure enough, he was still trapped inside, unable to move forward. Even some others had gone to the place where the Path River was and watched the figure who was stuck in the Path River, unable to move forward. The figure sat on the sword seemed lonely. It was as if he was the only person in the world. Zhuang Hong also came. He looked at Yi Futian and felt some strangeness. Where couldn't this guy go? But he had come to the Path River. Never mind that the Path River was difficult to cross because even if he could, there was still the one that restrained inside to consider. But Yi Futian seemed to understand everything in this instant. There was no one at the Path River. This beyond reach alone was enough to repel countless geniuses because they simply could not get across. It was just a short distance away, yet it was beyond reach. The sword didn't move, and Yi Futian didn't seem to have stopped moving at all. But he got it. He now knew what it meant to be beyond reach. What's going on? Just then, there was a cry of exclamation at the edge of the Path River, and many people looked in Yi Futian's direction in shock. It's getting closer, isn't it? They were shocked to find that Yi Futian was getting closer to the divine temple of the ancestral land. How could this be? He didn't seem to have moved? Someone frowned, puzzled. Moreover, Yi Futian was still approaching the divine temple of the ancestral land. He sat there as if he had done nothing at all. Awesome, Zhuang Hong praised. What an incredible display. Brother Zhuang, what is going on? A disciple from the divine palace asked. How would I know? Zhuang Hong replied. The man looked at him, dumbfounded. If he didn't know what was going on, why the excitement? However, I could venture a guess. Zhuang Hong replied. Everyone at the Path River of the ancestral land knows that this place is beyond reach, probably because it has the way of space hidden within it. Therefore, the only thing that could unlock the way of space in this place is the way of space. To overcome the way with the way. Zhuang Hong's deduction was correct. Yi Futian opened his eyes and saw that he was very close to the divine palace of the ancestral land. There was beyond reach in the Path River, and the only thing that could unlock it was to reach for the beyond. Yi Futian finally understood at this moment. It was not that no one wanted to come here, but that they could not get here. But how many at the divine palace could get through beyond reach? Beyond reach, reaching the beyond. Anyone who wanted to cross the Path River must first need to understand the way of space and unlock it. Except reaching the beyond, he couldn't think of any other ways to solve it, but perhaps other top geniuses had other solutions. The sword was already near the palace in front, and every time he moved forward he was getting closer. At this moment, suddenly, another invisible force descended, causing the forward-moving sword to stop. Time and space seemed to have once again fallen into a state of arrest. This time it was not a stillness dictated by him but was forced upon him. Everything seemed to have stopped flowing. Even the will of the great path between heaven and earth had stopped. In Yi Futian's perception, everything seemed to disappear at this moment. It was as if there was only this Path River in the world. There was no path, only river. The swords beneath Yi Futian disappeared into thin air. He was suspended alone on the Path River with no will of the way. It was as if he could float there naturally. But except for this, there was just nothingness. What is this now? Yi Futian was a little speechless. Was this Path River so difficult to cross? It was just that beyond reach seemed simple and easy to unlock, but the truth was that it was extremely difficult. If it was any other person, they might have never been able to take that step. However, he had just made that step and immediately fell into such a situation again. Where was this exactly? What place is this Path River? He wondered. And what exactly was that sacred palace in front of him? Why was this place so difficult to enter? It seemed that no one came here, not because of their laziness in cultivation, nor because it was an ordinary place for cultivation, but because everyone knew that they may not be able to cross. So, what place was this? What was the sacred palace in front of the Path River? What would happen after crossing over? When his thoughts turned to this, Yi Futian was a little jittery. He suddenly realized that the place he came for this time might not be quite so innocuous. But the matter at hand seemed to be how he could cross the Path River to reach that sacred place. Yi Futian, who seemed to have been stuck in a space of absolute stillness, lifted his feet to walk forward. There were ripples under his feet as if he was stepping on water. There was a booming sound coming from inside his body. It was as if the way inside his body was extending outward, moving forward. However, this was the same situation as before. Shockingly, Yi Futian found he was standing in the same place, unable to move forward. So, Yi Futian's face was becoming incredibly entertaining to behold. This time, it was obvious that they were not being trapped by beyond reach, which could not be unlocked by the method used previously. So, what was it this time? He stopped again. Many disciples of the divine palace gathered by the shore and watched Yi Futian's every move. It would not be easy to cross the Path River. Just as they were thinking about it, traces of invisible breaths inside Yi Futian's body spread throughout the world and seemed to link with heaven and earth. Soon, he seemed to once again getting a grip on perceiving the real world. Lifting his feet, Yi Futian took a step, and his body disappeared from where he was. His figure crossed the Path River directly and appeared at the end of the Path River. Countless eyes were fixated on this scene. Everyone looked at Yi Futian in amazement. Was it really as simple as stepping over? This made a lot of people feel strange. In all these years, the Path River that had only been crossed by one person in the past, had it really blocked Yi Futian? At this moment, had Yi Futian really crossed the Path River? Ahead, there should be other obstacles blocking his way. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Once Yi Futian took the step to cross the Path River. Beyond reach and reaching the beyond seemed to be separated by one step. Once Yi Futian took the step to cross the path river. Beyond reach and reaching the beyond seemed to be separated by one step. Once Yi Futian took the step to cross the path river. Beyond reach and reaching the beyond seemed to be separated by one step. Once Yi Futian took the step to cross the path river. Beyond reach and reaching the beyond seemed to be separated by one step. Unable to pass, he would always be in the path river. But if he was able to, he could cross it in one step. At this time, Yi Futian was standing in front of a golden great path. The divine palace in front stood towering above the sky, magnificent and sacred, impervious to spiritual will. There were palaces standing on the left and right of it. To Yi Futian, each palace exuded the might pressure of the great path. This golden great path was an ancient great path, which contained extremely powerful might of the great path. To walk through might not be an easy task. Furthermore, the end of this ancient golden great path was sacred and ethereal. There seemed to be someone standing there, but it was somewhat unreal. Was someone finally there? It seemed that someone was here after all. At this time, Yi Futian had realized that this place was unusual, and whoever could come was definitely the most top genius at the divine palace. Yi Futian didn't know that, at the moment, only one person had ever come to this ancestral land of the divine palace before him. It was the premier person of the current generation of the divine palace, hailed as the most unparalleled genius of Upper Heaven's realm. Unparalleled in the world meant overshadowing Yi Tianyu and Li Daozi. With everyone else at one level and him at another level, he could not be called unparalleled. What is this place? Yi Futian was becoming more and more curious. What exactly was this sacred place? Could it be that it was the place of cultivation for the great figures of the divine palace? Or were there hidden secrets in the divine palace? No matter what place this was, he wanted to go in and take a look. Yi Futian lifted his feet and walked forward. Just one step, and there was an extremely violent storm of the great path that came from this ancient golden great path. There was great pressure everywhere on this ancient great path. Yi Futian had a feeling that divine gods were standing there, guarding the front of the ancient path that he walked on. All these statues of the gods seemed illusory and yet solid at the same time. His spiritual will felt it, and the oppressive forces of the great path that bloomed from it also felt so real. This moment gave Yi Futian a familiar feeling, like the feeling he had when he was at a place of comprehension in the divine palace, celestial worthy mountain, where he met Zhuanghong. But the coercion of the gods here was even more real and terrifying. It was stronger than that of celestial worthy mountain. The blood inside Yi Futian's body roiled and roared, making a booming sound of the great path. He lifted his feet and forcing his way forward. He let out a violent roar. His clothes fluttered, and his hair was flying. His body seemed to bear a great amount of weight, and it was not easy to take even one step forward. Yi Futian moved forward one step at a time. Each time he took a step, there was a roaring sound of the great path that burst from his body. The great path was unified into one. It turned into a path of boundless power, forcing each step forward. He walked past a palace, but on this road of the golden great path, this distance seemed insubstantial. The road of the illusory great path seemed so long in his eyes. At this moment, Yi Futian suddenly developed a strong sense of crisis. In the perception of will, he seemed to perceive a ghostly figure again. It was as if the god of the underworld appeared directly in his mind. He seemed to see a pair of ghostly eyes, piercing his mind and attacking his spiritual soul. Yi Futian's face showed concern. On his journey to the trial, he had met a direct disciple from the divine palace, Bai Xiu, who seemed to be a disciple of Lord Underworld. So, what kind of ability was this? There were all the ways preached by the divine palace hidden within this ancient road of the great path. Various types of abilities erupted here and transformed the ways to attack those who were coming forward. If so, would he be subjected to later attacks of melody, sword method, or any other aggressive attacks? The flesh and spiritual soul had to brave tremendous force of oppression at the same time. Yi Futian struggled to move forward under such oppression. Sure enough, he had not taken a few steps before he heard a melody. The great path resonated with it and sharply increased the intensity of the previous oppression. Boom! Under the terrific impact of the great path and its power, Yi Futian's body stumbled backward. He slid several steps before he could get a hold of himself. His brows were knit tightly together. His eyes glanced at the ancient road of great path ahead. Was this road really that difficult to get through? But just exactly what road was this? One had to withstand all kinds of attack methods of the Divine Palace, and the combat strength of each force seemed to be determined according to his own strength and the strength of his realm. The stronger he was, the stronger the attack power of the Great Path. There was nowhere to hide. Yi Futian stopped. Instead of rushing forward, he took his time to adjust his breath. Previously, crossing the Path River required comprehension, but now what really mattered was one's own true great strength. There were no shortcuts on this road, and there were no tricks to get around it. Forcing his way through was the only option. At this time, on the other side of the Path River, many were standing on the bank of the river. They looked ahead, but Yi Futian was no longer visible. Yi Futian had already disappeared in the Path River. Has he gotten over and entered the ancestral land? Someone asked. Not yet. A genius talent who knew something about Path River shook his head and said, "It's just a small step to cross the Path River. The road afterward is even more difficult to walk." More difficult? Someone mused. Then why did this Path River trap so many other extraordinary characters? Difficulty is relative. It is not that the Path River was not difficult to cross. Even many of the disciples of the Path Boat at the Divine Palace could not cross the Path River. There are only very few who could cross. Look, someone is trying right now. The speaker pointed ahead, and there were already several people who were walking toward the Path River. When Yi Futian crossed, they wanted to try it themselves also, but they were still there, unable to advance after the first step. So, how difficult is it to get into the ancestral land? For so many years, there was only one person who entered it. It was more than just difficult, the person next to him said thoughtfully. That person looked in the direction of Path River when he heard this. How outstanding was that unusual character who had crossed the Path River and entered the ancestral land of the Divine Palace. Even the disciples of the Divine Palace had not many opportunities to see him, much less speak to him. He was not just a direct disciple, but the disciple of the 9 halls. The 9 halls taught one person jointly, unheard of in the Divine Palace. It was said that the Divine Palace intended to train him to become the true premier person in the upper heavens realm in the future. He was also moving toward that goal. No one else could surpass him, as it was difficult enough to even catch up with him. He was in his own realm. No one else could be mentioned with him in the same breath. After rumors spread that he was a descendant of the divine gods, some people claimed that there was divine blood in his body. Some even said that he was the reincarnation of the Almighty. No matter the rumors, it all served as a testament to his strength. Today, an outsider appeared in the Divine Palace and also had forced his way into the ancestral land of the Divine Palace. He had already crossed the Path River. Would the two of them meet in the ancestral land? Would Xin Jing, a swordsman from Taishan Mountain, cross the road? It was probably very difficult. Indeed, incredibly difficult. Yi Futian was still in front of the golden ancient road of the Great Path at this time. His body was radiant all over, and there was a roaring sound of the Great Path resounding inside his body. There was a strong and powerful breath of the Great Path circulating inside of him. His entire person seemed to have turned into a sword, an indestructible and omnipresent sword. The sword moved forward. It traversed the void and stepped onto the ancient road of the Great Path. Extreme pressure of the Great Path came forth and slammed on him, but from inside Yi Futian's body, there was a whistling sound of the sword. Sword will reached for the sky. It crossed through the pressure of the Great Path and continued to shuttle forward without slowing. On the contrary, he seemed to want to speed up and pass through it quickly. The melody sounded again. That was the power of divine sound, which caused the Great Path to resonate in unison and expanded its oppressive forces. Pissed, sharp and shrill sounds were heard, and Yi Futian's body also seemed to emit the sounds of melody, resonating with the sword. A power of the fleeting swordsmanship now swept out and defied the great path. All around Yi Futian, a terrifying storm of the great path now surged. This ancient road of the great path was alive, and it seemed to be able to perceive everything that Yi Futian was doing. As Yi Futian accelerated forward, godlike statues appeared at the same time, and infinite sword will erupted and swept toward Yi Futian. Bang! Yi Futian felt this continuing increasing strength, and he suddenly stomped. The great path inside his body roared, and the sound of a thundering elephant came out. It resonated with the great path. The divine elephant stomped on the sky. It was like a bona fide divine elephant had come down to the world. The shadow of the divine elephant shrouded the body, towering like a demon god, stabilizing the body by sheer willpower. It continued to step forward savagely. This was the secret method of the divine elephants, the divine elephant stomping the sky. If this ability had erupted outside, Yi Tianyu should have recognized him easily, but according to his observations of the divine palace, it was true that it did not interfere with the quarrels of the outside world and did not participate in the friction between disciples. Otherwise, as an outsider, he would not have been allowed to wreak such havoc in the divine palace, plunder many treasured lands to cultivate, and beaten many of divine palace's own disciples. No elders had come forward to mediate but had just let them do whatever they wanted. Therefore, the grudge between him and Yi Tianyu would not be mediated by the divine palace. It did not matter if the divine palace knew his identity. He seemed to be goaded by this ancient road of the great path to become extremely competitive. The more he was not allowed to set foot in it, the more he wanted to force his way through. Under the technique of divine elephant stomping the sky, he was even more centered, and the power of the great path was more violent and terrifying. Every step he took shocked the earth and suppressed all the offensive attacks. He would like to see how the road of the great path could block his way. Statues descended, and the entire ancient road of the great path was full of incomparable power. On this road of the great path, there was a tremendous storm. The great path roared between heaven and earth, trying to destroy all existence. In Yi Futian's mind, godlike statues appeared. At this moment, he was withstanding such indescribable pressure of might. The celestial soul attraction also bloomed, and the divine will rushed toward the sky. To counter against the attacks of the divine will within the great path, the divine elephants stomping the sky was integrated into the momentum of heaven and earth. Every step was earth-shattering, and the sword will of the great path surrounded his entire body. Yi Futian's entire body was holy and radiant, like the furnace of the great path. Each step he took was forcibly passing through this golden road of the great path. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. In the golden ancient road of the great path, the roaring sound of the great path continued as Yi Futian forced his way forward. He used all the will of the way that his body could muster in order to fortify his own might to the extreme. His goal was to cross the golden ancient road in the most aggressive manner possible and reach the end. In the golden ancient road of the great path, the roaring sound of the great path continued as Yi Futian forced his way forward. He used all the will of the way that his body could muster in order to fortify his own might to the extreme. His goal was to cross the golden ancient road in the most aggressive manner possible and reach the end. Those elusive and surreal statues collapsed and shattered, and the pressure that had descended finally dissipated completely. Yi Futian stood at the end of the ancient road, which was also in front of that sacred palace. A holy and solemn atmosphere enveloped this space. Faintly, the ancient noble atmosphere could be felt, which made Yi Futian even more certain that this place was very likely very important in the divine palace. It seemed it was fate that he had mistakenly broken into it as a place of comprehension and spiritual cultivation. He thought it was a place of common comprehension before, but he did not expect that it would be so difficult to get in. Judging from the level of defense, could other disciples of the divine palace step in here? If the answer was no, he could totally believe that. But ahead, there seemed to be a person. The great doors of the sacred yet ethereal palace were wide open, but that figure sat outside the palace. He was dressed very simply, and his hair casually fell on his shoulders. He sat atop the stairs with his eyes closed, not releasing any breath released from his body. Although Yi Futian was here, he still sat there quietly as if he was completely unaware of it at all. It was as if he was the only person in this world. Yi Futian glanced at the man in front of the palace above the stairs, and all he saw was his back. Although he did not know the man, he could feel his loneliness. He sat there as though he were independent of this world, that all the entanglements of the world had nothing to do with him. What kind of realm was this? One was reluctant to disturb his cultivation even in the slightest. Here, it seemed that any little movement would be a transgression. Yi Futian stood there quietly for a moment. He then slowly raised his feet and walked up the stairs, step by step, toward the upper ground. After a while, he came behind the figure, facing the sacred palace that was in front of them. It was a palace filled with great mystery. The cultivator who had been sitting there, had he entered it already? The person seemed to have been sitting here for a long time, so he should have gone inside already. Yi Futian looked at him again, and when he saw that the other was still irresponsive, he raised his feet and prepared to walk past him. "You are not a disciple of the divine palace?" At this time, a voice came out, and it was from the mysterious figure who had been sitting there. His voice was clear and powerful. It was as if it could imprint itself onto the minds of the others. Even though he was speaking, he sat there with his eyes closed, not turning his head. He did not even look at Yi Futian. "No," Yi Futian replied, "I was invited by the divine palace for the trial, and then entered the divine palace to cultivate and came here. May I ask, what is this place?" Yi Futian asked. He was becoming more and more curious. What was this place? It was so mysterious, solemn, and magnificent that even the most genius talents could not come here at all. "Ancestral land. Divine temple," the man answered. Yi Futian heard his words, and his heart trembled slightly. Even though he had guessed that this place was highly unusual, the response still shocked him. The ancestral land of the divine palace. The divine temple. Divine Palace was the premier holy land in Upper Heaven's realm as well as its most prestigious holy place for spiritual cultivation. This was the ancestral land of the Divine Palace. No wonder it was so difficult to get in. Just that river and the ancient road of the Great Path alone were enough to deter most people. It was basically impossible for the disciples cultivating at the Divine Palace to come. He had come accidentally, but the figure sitting in front of him was surely an exception as well. If not a disciple of the Divine Palace, then don't enter the ancestral land of the Divine Palace. "Go back," the figure continued. His voice was extremely calm, without any trace of emotion. It was as if stating something that was extremely ordinary, and his tone did not betray any feelings. Yi Futian didn't get angry when he heard the response. It was not entirely unreasonable. The ancestral land was of great significance to principalities of spiritual cultivation, and it was unlike ordinary places of cultivation as it may truly contain the core of inheritance. Since he was not admitted to the Divine Palace to cultivate, he was not a disciple of the Divine Palace. It would be inappropriate to say that he was seeking inheritance in the ancestral land. However, it had taken him a lot to get here, and to not enter now as he was right in front of the door was, more or less, an unreasonable request. Although, in theory, it was inappropriate for him to enter the ancestral land of the Divine Palace, the Divine Palace had not stopped him after all. The guides had also said that any location was allowed so long as one could reach it. Therefore, he had gotten here with his own power, and he would enter the ancestral land as long as he could. He did not consider that against the rules of the Divine Palace. "I still want to go in and take a look," Yi Futian said. The other did not respond. Yi Futian looked ahead and lifted his feet, walking toward the Divine Temple. He spat. Just because one is not a disciple of the Divine Palace does not mean they should not enter the ancestral land of the Divine Palace. However, the elders of the Divine Palace once said that as long as one could enter, then one may enter. So, my apologies in advance. As he was speaking, he continued to move forward, wanting to enter the ancestral land. "Quite right. As long as you are able to enter, you may enter." However, whether you can enter the divine temple is not really decided by you. At this time, a hollow and ethereal voice came and sounded in Yi Futian's ears. He glanced at the person in front of him, frowning. The person who spoke was not the one in front of him. There were others in the divine temple? He stopped advancing. His eyes were fixed on the divine temple. "What's your name?" That ethereal voice was heard again. This time, he faintly felt that the person who spoke was the divine temple itself, not the figure who was in front of him. It was someone using the temple to speak. "Xin Jing of Taishan Mountain," Yi Futian replied. "Wrong," the other responded. Yi Futian's expression changed. "How?" he asked. "You are not a cultivator from Taishan Mountain, nor are you Xin Jing," the other said. Yi Futian's heart trembled slightly. Suddenly, caution flashed across his eyes. He refocused his eyes. "I did come from Taishan Mountain," Yi Futian responded. "Everything is an illusion. Is it true just because you came from Taishan Mountain?" The other continued. Yi Futian understood that his disguise might have been detected by the other. He felt as though, standing before this divine temple and being shrouded in that sacred breath, he no longer had any secrets. Everything would be easily exposed. "What is true and what is false?" Yi Futian continued. "Is what's true and false really that important?" It didn't matter what his true identity was. If the divine palace did not participate in external disputes, then it mattered not who he was. Whether he was from Taishan Mountain or the heavenly mandate realm, there was no difference to the divine palace. The other was silent for a moment, as if to contemplate Yi Futian's statement. A few moments later, a sigh came from the divine temple. "You're right. What is true and what is false? The world is false, and so is the great path. What is the point of pursuing the truth?" After a moment of silence, the other let out a gentle sigh. It was a sigh that made everyone felt a sense of desolation. Yi Futian was surprised when he heard this. What did it mean? The world was false and the great path was also? He didn't understand. "I don't understand." Yi Futian looked in front of him and said, "Why do you cultivate?" The other did not respond to Yi Futian directly but asked instead why he cultivated. Yi Futian also asked himself for what did he cultivate? He thought about it for a moment but realized that he understood nothing. "In the past, I cultivated in many things, and it is the same now, but my mentality at the moment is that I must cultivate. There are too many things that require cultivation." Yi Futian sighed with emotion. It was as if he no longer remembered his original intention for cultivation. The pride of being born an emperor? He seemed to have forgotten the lofty ambitions he once had. Now, he was asked the reason for his cultivation. It was mostly that time was carrying him forward and that he no longer had a choice not to cultivate. "I had to cultivate." A low mumble was heard as if to discern Yi Futian's answer. This reflection told the stories of many cultivators. Out of those who cultivated in the world, how many still remember their original intention? Too many of them were forced to continue with their cultivation. Sailing against the currents, if not advancing, retreating was the only outcome. Yet retreat was not possible. That mysterious breath disappeared, and the ethereal voice seemed to no longer exist. "Elder," Yi Futian asked, but there was no response. "May I enter?" Yi Futian asked. There was still no response. It was as if the other had completely fallen into a state of quietude, leaving Yi Futian to choose for himself. At the very most, he probably would not interfere. "I will assume that elder's silence means agreement." Yi Futian bowed slightly and said. Since there was no outward disagreement, then it was up to him. As long as he could enter, he would enter. As he was speaking, Yi Futian continued to move forward. Yi Futian passed by the figure who was sitting there, trying to walk past him. However, at this moment he suddenly stopped. An extremely powerful force of the great path fell on him and compelled him to stop. As his eyes slowly moved, Yi Futian looked at the figure sitting there, and on the other's body, an extremely bright divine light was released. An extremely unbridled breath slammed into Yi Futian's body. It even rushed into his spiritual will. The breath of the great path inside his body roared as if it encountered a great threat, hence the roar. The young man who had been sitting there opened his eyes. He looked forward. Anyone who was not a disciple of the Divine Palace had no right to enter the ancestral land of the Divine Palace. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 1553, Huang Zhong. Chapter 1553, Huang Zhong. On the bank of the Path River, many Divine Palace disciples showed up, and they all gazed at the Path River in the distance. Now, nobody knew what happened to Futian. Had he stepped into the divine temple of the ancestral land? Had he met that person? Was he having a difficult time? There were many figures in the Path River at this time, and some talented cultivators had already entered the Path River. Among them, someone had even crossed the Path River and embarked on the Golden Road, which made many people watch in awe. However, the person was not a disciple of the Divine Palace but from the outside. He was the disciple of the Golden Divine Nation, Gai Shirshir. At this moment, Gai Shirshir was stopped by the golden ancient road of path. He was bathed in golden divine light, and golden beams were shot from his eyes. He looked straight forward. Even though his cultivation in martial arts was accomplished, he still could not break through the golden road and was trapped here. He saw that Futian had walked out of the ancient road and stepped in front of the palace in front of him. Besides Futian, there was another figure. Gai Shirshir had heard of that man. Although this person rarely walked outside, he was very famous. Even though he had not yet become a Renhuang, he had already attracted the attention of the world, especially among the top powers who all knew his name. Gai Shirshir's elders also often mentioned this person to him. Some thought that he would inherit the position of the Divine Palace Lord, and some said that he would not stay in the Divine Palace forever, that there would be a place for him in the higher heavens realm, the center of the 3,000 realms of the Great Path. They all gave high praise to him. He was the disciple of the 9 palaces, jointly cultivated by all masters of the palaces. He was a symbol of a generation. Before, Gai Shirshir was somewhat dissatisfied when he first heard about him and had sought opportunities to fight with him. This time, he also wanted to meet him in the Divine Palace. However, the person had entered the ancestral land, but he was blocked outside. Not only that, but he also met another person on this trip, Shenjing of the Taishan Mountain. Shenjing defeated him and stepped on the golden ancient road. Gai Shirshir began to question himself. Could it be that he was inferior to those two? Thinking of this, his body became more dazzling in the divine light, and he continued striding forward. He wanted to walk there. Behind him, there even appeared many phantoms of the ancient golden deities, whose might suppressed the world. The sigh of the deities came, which made the might of the great path burgeon from his body. He immediately stepped forward and set off a storm of the great path. He would not yield to anyone and did not think he was inferior to others. Read more chapter on VIP novel. Calm Futian looked at the figure sitting forward and asked, "What do you mean?" The men of the Divine Palace didn't stop him, but this disciple of Divine Palace sat here and wanted to stop him? The person didn't speak, still sitting there quietly. He looked at the palace in front, with a pair of eyes lacking luster. He said, "You should retreat." He didn't explain why but just wanted to let Futian retreat. Looking at him, Futian could feel that this lonely figure seemed to contain ultimate pride. The great path in Futian's body roared. He watched the person and continued moving forward. He didn't say anything either. Even the elders of the Divine Palace didn't care, so how dare a disciple of the Divine Palace tell him to retreat? However, he could tell that this person was strong, very strong, and might even be the strongest disciple in the Divine Palace. He was more powerful than Li Daozi, who gave him much pressure. Otherwise, he would not be here. However, even so, how dare he let Futian who had come here go back? Since he had come to the divine shrine of the ancestral land, Futian had to take a look inside. "My name is Huang Zhong," the person in front of Futian said. His voice was sonorous like the bell of the great path. The moment his voice fell, there seemed to be countless golden ancient bells appearing between the heaven and the earth. The sound circulated around the world and completely wrapped Futian inside. The bells rang through the world, and the sound of the great path roared. The destructive storms of the Great Path directly attacked Yi Futian, forming one giant storm of the Great Path. Yi Futian instantly felt a terrifying force of attack on the Great Path. It was not only from the flesh but also from the soul. That person was standing still and didn't even look back at Yi Futian. He was looking forward, and those ancient bells of the Great Law just rotated around his body frantically. The power of the attack was just the killing power of the Great Path brought by the sound of bells. Those killing powers were like golden lightning, splitting the void sky and breaking the souls of the deities. This attacking power of the Great Path was stronger than Li Daozi's sword. Yi Futian could feel that Huang Zhong had indeed reached the limit between Nirvana and Renhuang Plains. The ancient bells of the path all over the sky were transformed by the mind, and the roaring might in his body seemed to become light of the wheel of the Great Path. This person might have already become half a Renhuang and was only a step away from the Renhuang Plain. In fact, Yi Futian still underestimated Huang Zhong's level. Huang Zhong had been in his current plane for many years, and he could actually enter the Renhuang Plain at any time, even at this moment. But he still chose not to enter the Renhuang Plain because he wanted to build a different divine wheel of the Great Path. Only in this way, after entering the Renhuang Plain, could he be different from other Renhuang figures and have a higher starting point. He was born extraordinary, so he was supposed to do extraordinary things. The Renhuang Plain people dreamt of others was nothing important to him. Even if he became a Renhuang, he would just want to be a peerless one. The fairy soul bloomed from Yi Futian's body, and there was fairy light shining around his body as if a fairy phantom showed up. At the same time, the sound of divine elephants roared in his body. The Great Path roared, and there seemed to be numerous phantoms of divine elephants that suppressed the eternal sky. Divine elephant stomping the sky was released, and Yi Futian forcibly moved forward. The power of the divine elephant swept out with the dazzling sword of immortal souls, annihilating the light of the Great Path. Huang Zhong slowly turned around and looked at Yi Futian. He still looked so ordinary, but the light of the path surrounding his body was so unusual. This was the first time Huang Zhong turned around to look at Yi Futian and feel the life force from his body. He said, "Divine elephant stomping the sky skill of the heavenly mandate realm elephant clan, celestial soul attraction of celestial gate of vast heaven, swordsmanship of Taishan mountain." Yi Futian heard Huang Zhong's words and showed surprise. A real top-level talented figure like him could recognize the unique abilities being released at one glance. He had much more knowledge than normal people. Here was the higher heavens realm, and Huang Zhong cultivated in the Shangxiao Divine Palace. Yet, he could easily recognize two abilities obtained from the heavenly mandate realm, which reflected how vast his knowledge was. "It seems that you are from the heavenly mandate realm," Huang Zhong continued. Divine elephant stomping the sky and the celestial soul attraction came from the demon divine elephant clan and the fairy power celestial gate of vast heaven, respectively. Still, this person could use both of them, so he could tell Yi Futian was not a simple person. It was no wonder he could get here. "I'm from the heavenly mandate realm. Yi Futian." In the palace, the lingering voice came out again, which made Yi Futian stunned. He felt quite impressed in his heart. In front of the great people of the Divine Palace, not only was the technique of disguise easily seen through, but after he showed his skills, his true identity was also easily recognized. But this was also normal. Huang Zhong was a disciple of the Divine Palace, and although he might not know what happened in the Heavenly Mandate Realm, the battle of the Heavenly Mandate Realm was very influential. It even affected the whole political pattern of the Heavenly Mandate Realm. Some disciples of the Divine Palace were also there. Elders of the Divine Palace must know about the event and maybe had been concerned about the matter, so it was normal for them to recognize him. "Sir, since you know me, you should understand that I use the name of Shinjing, given my current circumstances. Please forgive me." Yi Futian looked at the shrine and said, since the other side knew him, then he should also know about the disintegration of the Celestial Gate and could understand why he was disguised. The other side was silent for a moment, and Huang Zhong did not continue to attack. And then, another voice came from the shrine. "The two most legendary descendants of the Heavenly Mandate Realm today are Yi Futian and Gu Donglu. Now, one of them is here." The person standing in front of you is the most legendary person of the young generation of the higher heavens realm. It could be accidental, but it could also be inevitable, the voice said from the shrine. The most legendary figure was destined to meet the same legendary character because they had no other opponents. It was destiny. Yi Futian glanced at Huang Zhong when he heard these words. This person was hailed as the most legendary figure of the younger generation in the higher heavens realm. No wonder he was here alone, and he was so powerful. Although they hadn't started to fight, Yi Futian could feel strong pressure from him, far from what Li Daozi could offer. It seemed that this person was not at the same level as Li Daozi. Now I get it, Huang Zhong whispered as if he also felt relieved. No wonder Yi Futian could come here. Was it because he was one of the most legendary figures in the heavenly mandate realm? Even so, since his realm was far superior to that of Yi Futian, if the two confronted each other, it would still be unfair. Looking at Yi Futian's figure, Huang Zhong raised his hand, and the ancient bells of the Great Path suddenly covered the sky and chimed together, like making a chant of the Great Path. Terrifying golden lightning madly thrust out. Above the sky, there seemed to be many towering phantoms showing up like real deities. Huang Zhong's finger pointed at Yi Futian, and there seemed to be golden divine wheels of the Great Path sweeping out. They suppressed the eternal world, breaking the void sky, and destroying the souls. At this moment, everything seemed to be on the brink of collapse. The light of the deed of thorough comprehension exploded from Yi Futian's body, and the might of the Great Path was released to the limit, and a majestic giant phantom of the shocking divine elephant appeared. He raised his palm to bombard the void sky, and the elephant rushed out. The fleeting divine sword also swept out to defend the approaching attack. It seemed that as the ancient bell of annihilation sounded, the wheel of the Great Path destroyed everything. Giant phantoms of the elephants collapsed and shattered, and the light of the sword was annihilated into nothingness. In front of the ancient bell of the Great Path, everything should be shattered into nothingness. Clang, clang, clang. The bell resounded through the world, and the sound of destruction lingered for a long time. Yi Futian's body roared and flew out of the shock. The body was about to burst, but there was a strong might wrapping around the body and sustaining his life force. His body descended from the stairs, but he still looked up at Huang Zhong. With the physique of the Great Path, the soul of the Great Path, Huang Zhong was not just half a step from becoming a Renhuang. It could even be said that he was but a line away from the Renhuang plane. He stood there and took a glance at Yi Futian, then turned around and sat there again. His eyes were closed as if nothing had happened just now. "Go in," Huang Zhong said. He didn't stop him anymore. "If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Tip: you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters." Yi Futian glanced at Huang Zhong and didn't know what he meant. Previously he wanted to stop him, but after he shot, now he just stopped. Yi Futian glanced at Huang Zhong and didn't know what he meant. Previously he wanted to stop him, but after he shot, now he just stopped. With his ability, if Huang Zhong wanted to stop Yi Futian, it was not easy for Yi Futian to break into the shrine. Huang Zhong gave up and did not hinder his way. Yi Futian retrieved his thoughts and kept walking forward toward the shrine where his thought could not invade. Yi Futian stepped into the shrine, and an extremely strong sense of the Great Path enveloped his body, and the will was very intense. Yi Futian looked up into the void sky and could perceive that there were endless ancient characters of the Great Path dripping down. His eyes became extremely bright. He was able to see through the nothingness. This world seemed to have changed accordingly as well. The infinite characters floating between the sky and earth seemed to contain some kind of mysterious power. They are all laws of the Great Path, Yi Futian thought, his heart trembling. Here was the ancestral land of the Divine Palace, the Holy Shrine. No wonder Huang Zhong did not allow himself to set foot in it. The real ancestral shrine contained the true essence of Divine Palace. In such a place there were no guards to stop him. Huang Zhong also came here to comprehend the path, and of course, even the golden road of the Great Path itself could stop countless people. Yi Futian kept walking forward. Among the endless characters floating between the sky and the earth, there were also some statues, like the deities he'd seen before. Whether it was Celestial Worthy Mountain or the Sword Mountain, or the power released by Huangzhong, they all somewhat shared similarities. It was as if they all came from this shrine. Sword Lord. Yi Futian walked to a statue and murmured. The infinite sword spells floated between the sky and the earth and turned into flowing rivers of swords. He had the same feeling once in the Sword Comprehension Mountain. The statue was also engraved with handwriting, which recorded the life of this heroic figure. Wanlu Sword Lord invented the 49 techniques of comprehension sword and derived infinite sword skills from the 49 techniques. He once slashed off the 7 layers of celestial ditch with one single strike. What does this mean? Yi Futian whispered. He looked at the statue as if there was very intimidating sword will hidden above the statue. Here was a more suitable place than Sword Comprehension Mountain to comprehend the path. This Wanlu Sword Lord should be the ancestor of the Sword Palace. Yi Futian looked at it for a moment and walked to the other side. He saw a statue like a god. That was the Zhenshi Sky Lord, who made a breakthrough in the path, suppressed the world, and could shatter the 7 layers of the celestial ditch. Yi Futian frowned. He continued to look at the next statue. One of the statues was sitting and playing the zither. There were infinite notes floating in front of the statue. Yi Futian knew from a glance that this statue should be the ancestor of the Divine Music Palace. Yi Futian walked through the statues, a little bit shocked. Eventually, he came to the front of the shrine, where there was no statue, but only a stone stele, which released very bright light of the great path, enveloping the whole shrine. Above the stele, there were 2 lines of writing: "Have a heart for the world and establish a life for the people." These 2 lines of writing went straight into Yi Futian's mind as if it turned into a voice echoing in his mind. It was like the sound of the great path, lingering for a long time. At this moment, Yi Futian felt a sense of awe. He was deeply moved and his heart beat fast. Have a heart for the world and establish a life for the people, inherit the sacred knowledge of the past, and create peace for the future. What kind of bravery was this? And what kind of place was this top 1 holy land in the higher heavens realm? He only knew that the Shangxiao Divine Palace preached to the world and was never involved in worldly affairs. It seemed to be a place for academic study, so after they opened the land of proving the way, all the top forces in the higher heavens realm were invited to enter. In each and every aspect, this place was indeed a respectable and pure holy land for cultivation. However, if it was just a holy land for cultivation, why did they have such a bold mind? What kind of mission did the Divine Palace carry? And undoubtedly, here was the most powerful place for cultivation in the Divine Palace. The statues of the ancestors of the 9 palaces stood here, and the mysterious life force of the Great Path enveloped the entire shrine. If so, why was it so difficult to set foot here? In his view, apart from Huangzhong, for other disciples in the Divine Palace, even close disciples like Yi Tianyu and Li Daozi, it was not easy to set foot here. He remembered that when he was outside the shrine, there was a voice inside, asking him why he cultivated. He replied that he had no choice but to cultivate. After that, the other side didn't say anything. Was this question a test? Yi Futian looked at the gorgeous handwriting. It was as if it could be imprinted in his mind. He bowed slightly to the stele, full of respect. The boldness reflected in these 2 lines of handwriting was worthy of respect and awe. Yi Futian lifted his head, looked at the stele, and said, "Sir, I have some doubts and need your advice." Although there was no one in the temple, there was the voice. Naturally, someone was here, even though he couldn't see it. Yi Futian's words echoed in the shrine. After a moment of silence, finally, a voice sounded. "You can tell me," a hazy voice said. It was hard to tell where it came from. It seemed as if it was everywhere. "Where am I?" Yi Futian asked. "Divine Shrine. The ancestral land of the Divine Palace," the voice responded. "Who built it?" Yi Futian asked again. "Ancestors of the Divine Palace, of course," the other side said again. "Why was it built?" Yi Futian asked again. There was silence in the shrine again, and the response was no longer fast. The answer is what you have seen, the other side responded after a moment of silence. Apparently, he was referring to the handwriting on the stone stele, for the world and for the people. I don't know what you mean, Futian said. He was not questioning it, he just didn't understand. The divine palace is the top one holy place for cultivation in the upper heavens realm, and even people from other realms come here to study. Since this is the case, why not let the disciples of the divine palace cultivate in this holy land of cultivation? Futian asked again. The world has imperfections. If they can't get here, it's useless for them to come, the other side responded. Futian's heart trembled. There were imperfections in the world. On that day, on the Taishan mountain, when Lord Taishan made the breakthrough, he sighed and said that the world had imperfections. Why does the world have imperfections? Futian asked again. He was more and more confused. The path of the heaven collapses, the other side said. Futian's heart trembled. The path of heaven collapsed, so the world had imperfections. Sir, you have said before that the world we see is not real, so what is the real world? Futian asked again. He didn't understand this sentence when it came from the shrine. It's just like when I see you, you are not the real one. As for the real world, you need to explore it yourself, the other side responded with a certain expectation in its voice. The purpose of this shrine is for us to comprehend these ancestors' paths, right? Why did Wang Zhong sit outside to cultivate? Futian continued. The purpose here is not to comprehend the ancestors' paths, the other side said. Futian was puzzled and asked, what is it, then? The world has imperfections, and the great path also has imperfections. The wheel of the great path made by cultivators is also flawed, not the perfect wheel of the great path. It can be said that there are obvious defects and cracks, the other side slowly said. Futian was very shocked when he heard this. Even the divine wheels of the great path created by Renhuang figures are also flawed? Futian asked. When reaching the Renhuang plain, one had already become a Renhuang of a district with great prestige. However, their divine wheels of the great path were also missing? This was unimaginable. Some people call it the ordinary wheel of the great path and say that Wang Zhong wants to create an ultimate wheel of the great path, but, in fact, in the 3,000 realms of the great path, the divine wheel of the great path, which was built by the vast majority of Renhuang figures, could be said to be incomplete. It means this is the great path. It has imperfections. Futian listened quietly. Did many Renhuang figures know this cruel fact? He said that the world he saw was not a complete world. So what was the truth of this world? The true divine wheel of the great path is the golden divine wheel, and what's more, it is the divine wheel that contains dazzling light. Once it blooms, it is dazzling. The great path is as one, and the sun and the moon shine together. The hazy voice sounded quite emotional. It said, only those who have seen the real divine wheel will know the flaws of the divine wheel of the great path. So, is this the meaning of this shrine? Futian asked. He sensed that there seemed to be a very wonderful force in the shrine. It was likely that this force also cast the trees in the land of proving the way. That's exactly the case, the other side responded. The shrine has become a world itself, making up for the defects of the path. Here, the path is not missing. If one can cultivate here and become a Renhuang, one can cast a complete divine wheel of the great path. Of course, it is much more difficult than casting an ordinary wheel of the great path. If one can't cross the river of the path and walk through the golden road, it is meaningless to cultivate here. However, you and Huang Zhong were able to come here. Futian was lost in thought. At this moment, many things came to his mind. It seemed that a lot of things were related to it. Or to say, from the beginning, his life had been given an extraordinary meaning. He was destined to be inextricably linked to this truth of the world. There must be a treasure in the shrine to make up for the defects of the path. If it is not the strength of the shrine itself, I am afraid it will bring bloody conflicts to the world, Futian whispered. The moment his voice fell, suddenly, a strong pressure came onto him. Futian looked normal and calmly looked forward. He heard the voice continue, you are right. Although the palace is the top one holy place for the cultivation of the higher heavens realm, the threat always exists. Once the divine palace is weakened, it will bring many bloody conflicts. Ordinary people didn't know, but how could the top characters not know the secret of the imperfection of the world? There was a treasure in the divine palace to make up for the defects of the world. One could imagine how many people were coveting it. What Yi Futian said was very impolite. I get it, Yi Futian said and nodded. He didn't ask the impolite question deliberately. He just wanted to confirm one thing. He had experienced many things on his way of cultivation, and he was a secret himself. What do you get? The voice asked. Yi Futian looked at the steel in front of him. The world had imperfections, but the divine palace wanted to raise a cultivator without imperfections. Thank you for solving my confusion. Yi Futian saluted the steel slightly and said. Then he walked to a statue and sat down, cultivating with his eyes closed. He didn't answer because it also was his own secret. The world had imperfections, but his path had no imperfections. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.